Hello and welcome to another Commonwealth Conversation. This is We Virginians. I am Ryan Gilchrist. Today we're talking higher ed. The coronavirus pandemic has upended the academic calendar, and while finals may be progressing for the spring semester, the fall semester is right around the corner. So joining us today are a couple of college presidents from Virginia. We have Tracy Fitzsimmons. She is the president of Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia. Welcome, Tracy.
Glad to be here.
And we also have Scott Miller, president of Virginia Wesleyan University in Virginia Beach. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Ryan.
Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Marisa Porto. She is the executive in residence at Hampton University and a former newspaper editor and publisher. Hello, Marisa.
Hello. Good afternoon, all.
Since you have a few connections to academia already, Marisa, why don't you get us started with the questions this morning?
All right. So I guess my first question is a scene-setting question, and that is, there's a lot of discussion that's going on right now about what's going to happen with the fall semester. A lot of colleges are talking about online only, talking about some sort of flexible hybrid model. There's been some discussion about maybe bringing freshmen back, but leaving seniors and juniors at home. So tell us a little bit about what's happening on your campus. And I think if it's okay with you, I'll start with you, Tracy.
Of course, just like all institutions, we encouraged our students to go home and shelter in place, to stay and be in lockdown. So we have almost no students in residence, just those very small number of students who didn't have a place to go that was safe. And all of our faculty and staff, almost all of them, are working remotely and have been for the last 8 weeks, and everything transitioned to online learning. So of course, we're not closed, we're just all remote right now. As for this fall, I would say, honestly, none of us have a crystal ball. Just like none of your listeners know exactly when they'll be able to have a graduation party or go to the beach or go to the store without a mask, no college president really knows when we will definitely be able to reopen in person. But I say that every college president in their heart wants nothing more than to reopen in person, to be able to welcome students back to on-campus, face-to-face learning at residential housing. And we're all gonna do our best to make sure that is possible to do in a safe way as soon as possible.
Scott, is there anything that's changed at your university as far as bringing students back? Have you made a decision yet for the fall?
Sure. This all unraveled for us at the start of spring break. So our students were headed out in various directions, and one of the biggest challenges that we've been in remote instruction since March the 23rd, but our students were sent home for their safety, for their well-being, but many of them, about half of them, had to leave their personal belongings in their residence hall rooms because the state advisory had indicated to us that if they had gone to South Carolina or to Cancun or to Florida on vacation, it wasn't good from a health standpoint to bring them back to our campus and contaminate the facilities. So we've been doing a staggered schedule of students in less than 10 capabilities coming to campus to be able to pick up their personal belongings. We are cautiously optimistic about the fall. And this morning, we sent out a preliminary announcement that indicated our intent to begin in person on August the 26th. Part of that notification was to let first-year students know that we're not going to do the May, June, July new student orientation. We're going to slide it to August and hopefully do it before classes begin on August the 26th. But we have a three-part plan that depending on if there's a spike in Virginia, we'll address it in different ways. And again, no one has a crystal ball to be able to predict this. But our first plan is that we would begin in person on the 26th of August. If the 26th of August becomes unrealistic, we would push the in-person back to October the 1st, move our January term to May, and finish first semester in January. That all can be option one. Option two would be a hybrid model where the first 7 or 8 weeks of the semester we would operate in a remote fashion, not online, but in a sort of a hybrid model. And then the second part of the semester in person. And then our last resort if a spike does occur at the wrong time, we would explore the possibility of offering the entire fall semester in an online format. That's the least desirable of options. When you have 18 to 24-year-olds, they go to campuses for intercollegiate athletics, for Greek life, for student activities, for meeting new people, for those engaging conversations with their faculty and friends. So, we would like to open in an in-person format, but we would never do it to risk the health or safety of either our faculty or our students.
Marisa, let me just jump in and say what Scott's saying is so essential to understand what's happening at colleges and universities. At this point, usually college presidents are planning for one type of opening. And now you've just heard that at Virginia Wesleyan, they're planning for 3 different options. Here at Shenandoah, because we have such a large graduate school, we are planning for actually 5 different options. And this is happening at colleges and universities across Virginia and beyond. So imagine you're doing a budget model, a tuition model, a plan for what type of education it is for each of 3 or 5 different approaches.
That sounds like a lot of moving parts. So I guess since you all have thought through this so much, I wonder if you've thought a little bit about what does it look like if they come back to the campus? I mean, what kind of social distancing happens in a classroom? What kind of public space, what do you do with the public spaces on campus? If you have interactions with the local community on certain parts of your campus, how does that work for you? I've been looking at some stories related to what happens with college campuses that are in the center of a community. How does that work for you? I think maybe Scott, you could start.
Yeah, and I think Shenandoah and Virginia Wesleyan are unique in that we have relationships with healthcare systems in our communities that give us the best and the brightest from the science world to advise us on those procedures. At Virginia Wesleyan, the CEO of Centera Healthcare is on our board of trustees. We also contract our health center with them and our sports medicine program. And they have offered to be a resource to us as we prepare to reopen, to make sure that we're thinking of everything. I also think it's important to point out that while the private colleges in Virginia do compete for students, we're friends when it all comes to addressing this situation. And I think the sense of collegiality that Tracy and I have found from our colleagues in the Virginia Foundation of Independent Colleges and the Council of Independent Colleges in Virginia is amazing. Schools that compete on athletic fields, schools that compete head-on for students are all in a very collegial way getting together regularly in discussions to say, have you thought about this as you reopen? And when you take the brain power of the 15 VFIC presidents and the 31 CICV presidents, there's such good information that comes from that. And together we're going to address this situation in a way that we'll be making the best decisions that we can for our students moving forward.
Certainly. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tracy, please.
I was just going to add that this is one of those times where size does matter. And so if you look at what the governor's phases are, phase 1 and phase 2, part of that is small groups, less than 10 or less than 50. At a smallish private college, you pretty much can't find a class that's larger than 25 or 50. And so that kind of social distancing isn't going to be a challenge for us. What we're going to be doing, all of us, I imagine, and certainly here at Shenandoah, is to change up the classrooms. So instead of students sitting side by side, there will be social distancing because we'll be moving them to larger classrooms. They might feel a little bit empty, but it'll at least be safer. We'll be adding things like additional cafeterias so that students have more space sitting with each other while they're eating. We also all need to think about things like student-teacher placements, clinical rotations for nursing students, physical therapists, pharmacists. All those things are essential to a student's education and their ability to get their degree and then to serve society. I have to say that the students are clamoring to get back to their professional training. because if they do that, they can graduate on time. They can get into the workforce when it's all up and running again and be able to take care of others. Here at Shenandoah, we're actually spread out. Our main campus is in the northern Shenandoah Valley, where it's actually very largely unimpacted thus far by the coronavirus. Very few number of cases and hospitalizations. We also have smaller campuses in Loudoun County and Fairfax County, where there are indeed a much higher number of cases. And so one of the things we're considering is, do we open the main campus on time and then we phase in an opening for those other two campuses? Or perhaps those students start their classes here in Winchester and then transition back to those campuses when it's safest.
Certainly, online learning is nothing new, but it is on this scale when you have every student trying to participate that way. How has it matched your expectations? What were you prepared for? And what types of plans are you making if you have to deal with this in the future? And Tracy, let's start with you on that.
So sometimes you just get fortunate in the way you have put things into place. And so here at Shenandoah, we had a pandemic plan on the books for more than 10 years, and we have an I Am Learning initiative. So every student comes in the door and they get an iPad and a MacBook. And all the faculty members have the same technology, and almost all the staff members. And so the students had the technology that they needed to be learning online. And more than half of our faculty had already received an online teaching certificate. It was just sort of the plan moving forward for Shenandoah that we would be incorporating more and more online classes and programs. Turns out we're doing that a lot faster than we had anticipated. But the fact that they already had the training, a good number of them, and they had the technology really helped. Also, many of our colleges and universities started seeing what was coming early on, and so we began planning early. So our emergency preparedness group got together in January to begin planning for this possibility. And in February, we told the whole faculty, you need to plan to go entirely online. So the rest of the faculty members who hadn't been trained were able to be trained up. So we didn't miss a beat. We just went straight to online learning. It's a transition. It wasn't anybody's first choice. Our students didn't sign up for it. Our faculty members didn't, but they are all resilient. And I think you'll find across Virginia that the faculty and students, public and private institutions, have all risen to the challenge. But it's different when you're doing it in the midst of the crisis and when you're looking ahead to something else. So for example, I always teach one course every year. I tend to teach in the fall. So I'm already thinking ahead about how I will need to learn to teach online just in case we have to start online. While that's not the plan, we need to be prepared for everything.
Scott, similar question in that vein, but again, looking forward to the future. What did we miss? What can be done better to prepare for, if another incident like this were to come to pass?
Well, Virginia Wesleyan is a very traditional residential liberal arts college. And when I arrived here as the new president 5 years ago, the board said to me, we are a well-kept secret. We don't want to be. We've been very traditional in our approach. We don't want to be. And I said, well, one way we should be breaking out is to develop a small division of online courses that can serve the heavy military population that we have in this particular region. And 3 years ago, we started the process of saying to our faculty, we want you to learn how to teach online because we'd like to expand our services to military personnel who might start a class with you here and then get deployed and want to continue that class while they're on a naval ship out in the ocean somewhere. And so over the last 3 years, our faculty have been learning to teach online, and never did they realize that even those who have not been teaching online would be forced with a rather short timetable to convert their classes to an online or remote format. Some are not teaching in the purest sense of the word in an online format. Some are using hybrid models for greater interaction. But I think the exercise of going through 3 years ago and of hearing me say for 3 years, we've got to get our curriculum online. You all need to learn how to do this. I think it's yielding some benefits now that we didn't anticipate. Going forward, I think all institutions are finding, and there are some that are more traditional than either one of ours. Schools with larger endowments like to stick purely to the classroom activity and not explore online options at all. I think most higher educational institutions have found through this that this online process or hybrid process or remote process, that good learning can occur. It won't replace the traditional experience that we offer on our campuses, but it's a good way to supplement learning as well.
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about the financials behind the higher education business model. Before the coronavirus, higher education was going through some changing and challenging times, right? So students seeing large debt from graduation and maybe making decisions that they don't want to go to a traditional school. Some, again, online competition, the infrastructure is aging for some of the schools and universities. That's a struggle. And then, not enough financial, backing and endowments. And you saw before the coronavirus, some smaller universities and colleges struggling, maybe doing some consolidation, some closing their doors altogether, smaller colleges. And now you add the coronavirus into this business model challenges, that higher education is facing. What do you see happening in the next 6 months to a year in higher education? When even before this was happening, there were predictions that half of the universities and colleges would be gone in 10 years. We could start with Scott.
Well, I think you're talking to two presidents who are innovators. And, I'll do my disclaimer on the front end regarding Shenandoah. My daughter and son-in-law are both graduates of Shenandoah. So I've watched how we as a family have seen the benefits of an institution that has changed effectively to a changing marketplace. I think the coronavirus has given us a wake-up call in higher education to do more with less, to be more effective in our delivery systems, and to be more responsive to our markets. I think the higher education that comes out of the coronavirus crisis will be different in its appearance. I do think that a number of our extremely rural institutions will go away or merge with other institutions. Sadly, that's the risk of it all. 150 years ago, when private colleges were popping up all over the country, it was normally because they were church affiliated, and the churches wanted them to be in secluded areas, away from distraction, where people could live and learn together and benefit from that. Students aren't looking for that anymore. And what we saw before the crisis was the number of 18-year-olds in this country and in this region in particular were rapidly declining. But at the same time, while that was happening, the crisis has put that into an even more intensified mode. So the higher ed that's coming out of this will have to be more efficient. We will have to continue to keep on the forefront cost effectiveness. Our schools had a tuition freeze 3 years in a row. I sort of chuckle when I see the public schools talking about, we're freezing tuition this year. We've done it 3 years in a row. And we serve 40% of our students are from underrepresented populations where money is important to them. We provide an institutionally funded work program where students can close the gap on cost. We do efficiency, parallel, stack-on programs with area community colleges so that those kids who can't afford to go 4 years at a private institution can go 2 years there, 2 years with us, have concurrent enrollment and benefit from the locations of both institutions. I think the innovative institutions are going to be looking at ways to contain cost, to open up accessibility, to do a good, to continue that outstanding job that they do at educating more diverse student populations than the public institutions. I'm just a walking, talking advocate of what the private liberal arts college, the private institutions in Virginia can do. And, I would underscore again that I think that any kid looking to go to college in Virginia can look at a full menu of options and find an institution that matches with their personalities, their career needs, and have a fit financially, they're not going to be coming out with a lot of debt if they address it that way. And our institutions, Shenandoah and Virginia Wesleyan, are two where our students do not come out with that $100,000 of debt that you see on MSNBC. We are more along the lines of buying a Honda for $27,000 and seeing that $27,000 of debt turn into $1 million plus in lifetime earnings.
Tracy, do you have anything that you'd like to add about the changing business model for higher education?
Well, a couple of things. So this past fall, Shenandoah had its largest freshman class we have ever had in our second largest graduate class. And we were on track for that for this coming fall as well. You know, we'll see what happens. There's a lot of changes with the coronavirus. I think you'll see a lot more online education. I don't think that you'll see residential colleges going away. Students thrive in face-to-face education. Online education can be good, but it is not the same. It is usually not the ideal and not the first choice. But online education is great for crisis moments like this, or for those that simply can't have access otherwise. Perhaps they're working adults or they're raising a child at the same time, and maybe it's easier for them to go to online education. I think you'll see more creativity from private colleges and public colleges in the online space. It will make us move more quickly, and that's a good thing for everyone. I don't think that you will see massive closures of higher education institutions. Yes, there will be some, but we are fortunate in Virginia that we have very strong private colleges, and we have a strong public college system and community college system, and we tend to work pretty well together. The State Council of Higher Education of Virginia places value on all of us, and the legislature and the governor have found value in all different forms here, and I think they will continue to support us to ensure that we all rise. It is important to note that the survival and the thriving of institutions of higher education isn't just about those students and those institutions, but it's about all those local communities. So here in the Northern Valley, Shenandoah contributes almost $200 million annually to the revenue of the Northern Valley. What would happen if we went away? It's a good thing we're not going to go away, because that's really valuable to this northern community. I do think in the very short term, you're going to see students rethinking some of their plans for college next year. So if you're a student, if you're a parent, do you really want to send your child to study someplace where you know they're going to be in a classroom of 200 or 750 other students elbow to elbow? Do you really want to send your kids to a place that is highly populated, where there's been a lot of the coronavirus going on? I think you're going to see a transition to semi-rural or more rural colleges for the near future. So perhaps before you were going to school in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore or New York, and now sending your child to Virginia Wesleyan or Shenandoah or Bridgewater or Randolph-Macon or Sweetbriar or Ferrum, whatever it might be, suddenly looks even more appealing. Because they know that these are smaller schools and they're in a safer area. So after 9/11, we saw people leaving those colleges in more populated areas near DC to go to many of these privates in Virginia. I think you're going to see that happen again this fall.
Oh, I know that the government has had the CARE Act, and that you all have been, I think, the recipient of some of that funding. How has this pandemic helped you from a fundraising standpoint, or from have you feel like you've gotten some financial backing from the government, from the state levels? Maybe Tracy, you can start with that.
Gosh, there's several different levels. So at the federal level, yes, we've all been recipients of CARE grants from the government. We're very grateful for the foresight of the federal government in thinking about all colleges and universities and our students. So many of us are busy at work distributing those emergency grants to our students that are largely based on a formula. So students who are Pell Grant eligible and are at the lower socioeconomic levels will receive the great bulk of those funds. That's really important. It helps them, it helps their families as well. Then there's the state level. The Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant is an invaluable way for Virginians to be able to choose to stay in Virginia to attend a private not-for-profit university. And we are grateful for the work of the governor and the legislature. They had planned to do a really big increase to TAG for starting next year. And that's going to be tough for them with a changing tax revenue base, but they're doing all they can to protect TAG. And we encourage all state delegates and senators to really push hard on that. And I know that's a real value for the governor. Keeping Virginians moving forward in their education and in Virginia is just a good thing for all of us. And then I'm so grateful for our Board of Trustees who stepped forward and said, let's start an emergency fund for students. And let's do an emergency fund for faculty and staff who might have healthcare needs, or they might have spouses that lost their job elsewhere. And they have stepped forward. And so we've got emergency grants available to students and faculty and staff. Maybe they didn't have good Wi-Fi connection at home, so we're helping them with Wi-Fi connection. They didn't have enough money to get home safely, so we helped them do that. And there's been some other emergency situations. Shenandoah was in a place that we were strong enough that we haven't had to lay anybody off or do any furloughs. In fact, we guaranteed full employment at full pay with full benefits to all of our faculty and staff through June 30, which is when we start our next fiscal year. And so we just thought that was really important. They've been loyal to us for a long time. They're working really hard, and we didn't want to further stress the local economies.
You know, talking about fundraising, Tracy and I are both active in an organization called the Virginia Foundation of Independent Colleges, and we would really be remiss if we didn't mention their efforts on our behalf. VFIC represents 15 of the more selective private institutions in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and its board is mostly made up of CEOs from businesses all over Virginia. And as soon as the shutdowns of college campuses occurred, as soon as some of the stories came out, Matt Schenk, the president of VFIC, called the board together and said, this is a time when we need to really reach out and help the students at our member institutions. And so they contributed $500,000 to develop an emergency fund for each of the 15 campuses to share in that fund, and to ask for money to help with students that have special circumstances. And it might be a kid in rural Lee County who's from one of our institutions who had to go home and there's no internet access. They could get a Chromebook and a Verizon card as a part of the special funding. It might be a student who doesn't have any place to go. They have no family. What do they do to meet their accommodations? But VFIC has been a leader for so many years, and we're so appreciative of their efforts to do that for our 15 schools. But it inspired other contributions from our alumni and board of trustees that said, we think this is special, we want to add to that fund. And so we have an extremely healthy fund on our campus, and we have a committee that's set up to hear special requests, to identify circumstances that are unusual, and to help those kids that really need our assistance.
I wonder if you would answer a question about, this is a time when there's so much change in higher education. I wonder if this is there's also a discussion that's happening about sort of reimagining how it looks as moving forward in the next maybe 3 or 5 or 10 years. You know, perhaps maybe Tracy, you could share with us your thoughts about what you think will happen in that time frame to reimagine higher education.
I think that in the short term, students are so excited to get back to their campuses. As soon as we all feel like it's safe to reopen, they are going to come in throngs, and we are going to work with them to be socially distant. But when you look to the future, I think what you'll see, instead of having online institutions and in-person institutions, I think you're going to see all institutions being much more fluid. And so institutions offering a full residential approach, a commuting approach, and an online approach, and that students will be able to move seamlessly across those. So maybe this semester it feels better for me to be online, but next semester I'd like to be in residence. And in the summer, maybe I want to be studying abroad. I want to be in another country, but I still want to be connected to my home institution. So there'll be more on-ramps and off-ramps and more fluidity between types of programs.
One last question, Scott, and that is there any public policy, is there any need for public policy change in Virginia based on what's happened in the pandemic related to higher education?
Yeah, I do think yesterday I was on a call on a Zoom meeting with Congressman Bobby Scott and 8 of the public college presidents, and I was hearing the case being made for policy. Nobody knows what to expect in the future, and one of the policy issues centers around liability. What happens if we open back up and a spike occurs again? What happens if a faculty or staff member comes to campus in good spirit, wanting to be helpful, and contracts the virus? There was a widespread concern I heard from my public college colleagues at having some type of liability protection in that regard from public policy, so that well-intentioned educators trying to do what's best for their students aren't put in a vulnerable situation that could result in litigations and expensive costs.
Well, I wanted to take the time to say thank you to both of you for sharing your thoughts and insights in the last few minutes. It's been a fascinating discussion. We could have this discussion for the next couple of hours, I'm sure, and continue this conversation. So I might ask you all to come back in a month or so and share where you're going next. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Terrific. Thank you both.
On behalf of everybody at Shenandoah, thank you. Be safe.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you again to President Tracy Fitzsimmons of Shenandoah University and President Scott Miller at Virginia Wesleyan University. We appreciate your time. We also appreciate the time of those of you who have watched this. Thank you so much. If you made it this far, surely you can spare us a like. And if you'd subscribe to this channel, that would help us tremendously. Until next time, this has been We Virginians. Thank you very much.